You know, a lot of what people are facing nowadays is the need to dramatically change the way they do their business. They've got the headwinds. But I think what this means for us in the IT world is we have to really understand what that means about how we change the way we do software and run infrastructure. My colleague Derek Harris wrote up this excellent kind of like survey tidbit from Forrester, which you can get a copy of if you're watching this in YouTube by clicking up there. And what it shows is that before the pandemic, people's priority of digital transformation and changing the way they do their software was kind of low. And afterwards, because the environment, what their needs were changed, that it became one of the top priorities. I think that's a great impetus to ask, what does that mean? There's two VMware Tanzu customers, Albertsons and Dick's Sporting Goods, and both of them had to dramatically change the way they did business to support delivery, curbside pickup. In the case of Dick's Sporting Goods, they had to very rapidly come up with a way to handle returns at the curbside. They didn't want to just cut that off because the way they did IT didn't support it. What are three things to think about when you're changing the way that you're doing business and when you're changing subsequently the way that you do software? So the first thing is that you need to shift in IT from a project way of doing things to a product way of doing things. Now, you hear about this a lot, but I want to talk about more of the mindset of what this means. Now, traditionally what IT does is they deliver projects. They're given a set of requirements, a schedule to meet, a budget to meet, and their job is to deliver as close to perfection as possible and keep that thing running. Their job is not so much to ask and investigate, to ask whys of why you're doing something, and really change and adapt to what the ongoing need of their customers are, whoever they're delivering the software. And this is fine if what you're doing is delivering to perfection. You're delivering a service that isn't going to change very much. When we're talking about people adapting their business to meet new needs, as we went over with the Albertsons and the Dick's example, what that means is that you're constantly thinking in a product way. You're discovering what the problems are. You're experimenting and changing what your assumptions were, how you write the software to implement it to actually meet what the needs of your customers are. You learn what the problem is. You don't get that set of requirements and a deadline to deliver to. It's this constant learning and making better. When you're doing things in a product way, you're not delivering static perfection. You're delivering ongoing usefulness, ongoing improvement, and ongoing understanding. That's why people talk about a learning organization so much. In order to do that, your developers don't have time to configure their infrastructure, set things up, and make sure it's secure, right? If you think about that example of Dick's Sporting Goods, where they need to be able to handle returns, they can't spend time building up the servers and the networking and the security that's needed. So instead, the operations people, now instead of delivering to perfection, delivering to that static set of things, they need to think about the developers as their customers, and that means two things. One, the operations people need to centralize and standardize what they're providing so that, again, the developers don't have to think about building the infrastructure and managing and securing it. But the way they go about doing that is they don't deliver those static enterprise architectures of the past. Instead, what they do is they think about those developers, those product teams as their customers, and the operations people are constantly discovering and refining and learning and optimizing and making better what that platform is. And they are thinking of supporting the developers. It sounds simple, but it's a lot different than what IT is used to doing. What we have grown up doing with things like ITEL and ITSM and service delivery, again, where we're thinking in a project way of doing things. Third, management needs to change the way they think about their job. Not only how they structure an organization, how they set up compensation for their staff, how they make sure that the developers, the product managers are inspired and curious about people and given the trust to go out and discover how people are doing that curbside pickup and constantly involve that product feature. But management also needs to learn a new way of setting up their organization. I think what's key here is that there's not any single one way to do those changes necessarily. Management isn't delivering a project. They also need to think about the developers as their customers, and they need to constantly be experimenting and learning and doing new things until they not only figure out what works, but also investigate what's no longer working and come up with a new way of doing things. As an example of that, on the Tanzu Talk podcast, my colleague Dormain, she was interviewing someone who put this in a very simple, funny way, that the development team started delivering things on a weekly, more design-driven product management way, and the manager was like, oh, this is all great, but where's the data for my burn down chart? And it's a ridiculous small example, but it shows how management didn't change and adapt to the new way that people were doing things. My daughter has these little cups that you can put into each other. What I've described here starts with the bottom of the customer who wants to return something at Dick's Sporting Goods. And then the developers are fitting into and thinking about those people as their customers. The operations team is thinking about developers as their customers and constantly learning and adapting. And management is thinking about all of that as their customers and constantly learning and adapting and optimizing. You're really putting in that kind of agility at all levels so that the business can learn and adapt. So if you want to learn more about that, you can click up here, and I suggest you book some office hours with us at Tanzu Labs. We'll give you some free consulting. Of course, we're trying to sell you something, but we'll kind of help you walk through and understand all the stuff that we're talking about. And even really, if you open up and talk with us, start to figure out what it is you can do to change. And as always, you can go to tanzutalk.com to find the archives of this and everything that I've mentioned. Bye-bye.